A devil in disguise as a civil servant. Li Hao, what would you say if I told you that humans can tame their own kind? Sounds absurd, doesn't it? But just imagine this. A pitch-black, suffocating, damp basement hidden right inside a residential building in Luoyang City, Henan Province, China, back in 2001. There, 4 women were gathered, cheerfully welcoming a man, a 34-year-old government employee named Li Hao. But here's what's strange. When he gave an order, they obeyed without hesitation, without a single question. He told them to dig, and they picked up the shovels and started digging right away. And then beneath that layer of soil was the body of a woman. So in the end, what the hell was happening in that horrifying basement? Who were those women? And why were they there? A midnight cry for help. September 2011. One night in September 2011, police in Henan Province suddenly received an emergency call. On the other end of the line was a woman, her voice trembling with panic. She said she had just escaped from a place where she'd been held captive for years, and that there were still others trapped inside. Immediately, authorities were dispatched to the address she provided, a rundown house tucked inside a residential area near Kaiwang Road, just a few steps away from the Donglu police station. From the outside, the house looked completely ordinary, but beneath the floor, there was a wooden plank small, about 1 square meter in size, blending in so well with the rest of the flooring that it was almost impossible to notice when they pried it open. They discovered a pit nearly 35 meters deep. From there, they had to crawl through a narrow passage, just wide enough for 1 person, then pass through not 1, but 6 locked doors. Inside was a basement, roughly 20 square meters in size. An air pipe had been installed to bring in ventilation, but the space was still pitch black, damp, and reeking of a foul, overwhelming stench. The moment one of them officers stepped down, he had to cover his nose and exclaimed, "What is that awful smell?" The place was so deep underground that even if you screamed, no one on the surface would hear a thing. At the end of the dark corridor, they found 3 women. One officer asked gently, "Ma'am, are you all right?" But the women said nothing, just stared blankly, their eyes filled with doubt. Their hands and feet weren't bound. They could move around, but their spirits seemed completely broken. It took a while before they realized these were real police officers. And then, they broke down in tears. A chilling discovery, but that wasn't the end. Another officer suddenly noticed a patch of freshly disturbed soil near the corner of the basement. The stench coming from it was even stronger, almost unbearable. Something in his gut told him something was very wrong. And he was right beneath that layer of soil were the decomposing bodies of 2 women. They too had once been victims held captive in this hellish place. The scene was immediately sealed off, and backup was called in to rescue the remaining survivors. At the same time, an urgent investigation was launched to track down the man behind it all, Li Hao. The arrest of the suspect, while police were urgently working to rescue the women held captive, a parallel manhunt was launched to find the mastermind behind it all. The prime suspect was quickly identified. Li Hao, 34 years old. The moment the case was exposed, he fled his residence and went on the run. Li Hao was originally from Xinye, a county in Nanyang City, Henan Province. He had previously served as a firefighter before switching careers and becoming a law enforcement officer at the Bureau of Technical Supervision in Luoyang City. In other words, a full-fledged government official. No one could have imagined that a man with a wife and a child, an infant just 8 months old, would turn out to be the one behind such a horrifying string of crimes. An old friend of Hao recalled that, as a child, he had always been introverted, quiet, and socially withdrawn. He would blush and get flustered whenever he was around girls. But after leaving the military, he changed completely, even once making a cryptic remark, "I need to do something." No one understood what he meant by those words back then, but now, everything is clear. In less than 48 hours after rescuing the victims, police carried out an emergency arrest of Li Hao. And what followed the full truth was enough to send chills down anyone's spine. He was the one who had kept 6 young women imprisoned in that basement for nearly 2 years. He made money by forcing them to appear on dark web porn sites, treating them as nothing more than sex slaves. The basement where the girls were held was divided into 2 small rooms. One served as their sleeping area. The other was filled with various items: a computer, magazines, comic books, even a deck of cards, things he believed would serve as entertainment to keep them from going insane during their long captivity. But no matter what he put in there, it was still hell. And the most haunting detail of all, the youngest victim among them had just turned 16. The victim's strange behavior during interrogation, when police first spoke with and questioned the victims, they were genuinely shocked, because what no one could have expected was that despite being locked up and controlled for nearly 2 years, all of the women seemed to have developed feelings for the very man who imprisoned them. Lee Hao. It sounds absurd, but it was completely real. Investigators believed that the victims were likely experiencing Stockholm Syndrome, a psychological response commonly seen in cases of long-term abduction or captivity. Simply put, Stockholm Syndrome occurs when a captive begins to develop emotional bonds, empathy, even affection for their captor. This kind of connection doesn't form overnight. It grows gradually over time, over weeks, months, or in this case, nearly 2 years of living in fear and complete isolation from the outside world. The longer they lived with their captor, the more they began to believe that he was the only one who understood them and allowed them to survive. As a result, the victims even started to resist, not the perpetrator, but the police and those who were trying to rescue them, according to data from the FBI's kidnapping database. About 8% of victims exhibit signs of this syndrome. One of the most well-known examples is the 1973 bank robbery in Sweden. During that incident, 4 bank employees were held hostage by 2 robbers for 6 days. But the strange part? After being rescued, the hostages not only refused to testify against their captors, they even raised money to help them get out of prison. The case of Lee Hao was strikingly similar. After spending such a long time trapped in a sealed basement, completely cut off from the outside world, the women became almost entirely dependent on their captor, both physically and psychologically. Over time, they lost their sense of right and wrong and began to believe that Lee Hao was the only one who needed them, who truly understood them, the true face of a man hiding behind the title of government official. Lee Hao, born in 1978, was originally from Nanyang, Henan Province, China. On paper, he was a respectable government employee, working at the Bureau of Technical Supervision in Luoyang City. His monthly salary was just over 2,000 yuan, not much, but enough to get by. According to Mr. Liu, the director of the enforcement office, Lee Hao was seen as a mild-mannered, hard-working man who carried out his duties responsibly and had never caused any trouble. Even when the police showed up at their office to investigate, everyone was stunned. No one could believe that someone like him could be behind such serious crimes. Everyone at the office said the same thing. Lee Hao was a decent man. He and his wife seemed happily married. She stayed home as a housewife, and he went to work every morning and came home every evening, just like any ordinary person. In short, to everyone around them, Lee Hao's family seemed like the picture of normalcy, peaceful, stable, with nothing out of the ordinary. But the truth behind that facade was more horrifying than anyone could ever imagine. He had been planning everything for a long time, and what people mistook for his normal life was, in fact, nothing more than a perfect mask carefully crafted to hide the horrifying truth. Unfolding right beneath his own home, in the basement, the Devil's Basement, starting in early 2008, Lee Hao began putting his horrifying plan into motion. Behind his wife's back, he secretly bought a house in the Zigong district, near Kaihuang Road. He told her he was taking on extra work, but in reality, he was quietly building a hell beneath the ground. Night after night, he crept to that house, shovel in one hand, flashlight in the other, and began digging with his own hands. By morning, he'd pack the dirt into plastic bags, load them onto his motorbike, and secretly dispose of them. He did everything alone. It all sounded insane, but thanks to his background as a former firefighter, Lee Hao dug with eerie precision, methodically, as if he had planned it all down to the last detail. And indeed, he had planned everything in advance. He knew this would take a long time. So he told his wife he'd been transferred to a new department working overtime, coming home late, nothing unusual, every day. As soon as work ended, he left the office not to hang out, not to see friends, but to quietly return to that house. And dig. By October 2009, when the basement was nearly complete, he began to act. He wanted to profit from his twisted desires, so he started looking for victims. But he didn't target just anyone. He believed that ordinary women wouldn't be able to endure the depravity he was about to unleash. So he focused on bars and nightclubs, places where young women worked far from home, vulnerable and easier to lure in. And in that line of work, it wasn't unusual for employees to suddenly quit or fall out of contact. So when 6 young women disappeared over the span of 2 years, no one suspected a thing. The 6 victims were Xiao Mei, Dan Dan, Kaka, Zhao He, Zhao and Zhao Ting. They were all young and attractive, aged between 16 and 23. Among them, Dan Dan endured the longest, nearly 2 years trapped in the darkness. And Zhao Ting, the last to be brought in, was treated the best by Li Hao simply because she appeared obedient and submissive. A chilling thought after being abducted. The girls weren't just locked up, they were forced to dig alongside Li Hao like slave laborers. The basement had no clean water, no toilet. Food was inconsistent sometimes. They only got 1 meal every 2 days, and even that was barely edible. It was all part of Li Hao's plan. He didn't rely solely on iron doors to keep them locked in. He wanted to wear them down physically, to the point where even if they wanted to escape, they wouldn't have the strength to run. So despite the brutal conditions, the girls were forced to work every day in a cold, foul-smelling basement filled with nothing but despair, exploiting women's bodies for profit at first. Li Hao had a simple idea: force the girls to strip in front of a camera to make money. From March to April 2011, he coerced them into participating in live-streamed sex shows right there in that dark, filthy basement. He bought a computer, set up video equipment, even installed a high-speed internet connection right into the basement, then forced the girls to perform obscene acts in front of the camera. He recorded everything and uploaded the footage to the Tencent QQ platform, selling access for 50 yuan per 30 minutes, or 100 yuan for 50 minutes. Just like that, over 50 pornographic videos were produced and sold by him to all kinds of online customers. Payments came in through Alipay and other digital platforms, and it wasn't a small amount, totaling thousands of yuan. But soon, he grew dissatisfied. The income didn't meet his expectations, and he was tired of the hassle operating equipment, editing videos, sending clips. It was too much trouble, not to mention, he started to get scared. What if one of the girls found a way to call for help online? If even one of them managed to send a signal to the outside world, the whole plan would fall apart. He started finding clients outside, negotiating prices, then taking each girl out to force them into prostitution for money. Afterward, he would bring them back and lock them in the basement like before. What's terrifying is, despite knowing they had a chance to escape, the girls didn't run. In fact, they obediently followed every order he gave. Later, police believed it might have been Stockholm Syndrome after being held captive and abused for so long. The girls began to feel a strange sense of attachment to the very man who harmed them, and that psychological twist made them stop seeing themselves as victims. Instead, they became unconscious followers, obeying him without question. He killed without batting an eye. In mid-June 2010, one of the victims, Zhao Ha, decided to risk everything and fight back. She waited for a moment when Li Hao let his guard down and tried to strike him by surprise. But after months of captivity and abuse, her strength was nearly gone. The blow did nothing to hurt him, it only enraged the monster. Li Hao immediately tied Xiao Ha to the bed, but he didn't stop. There, he provoked conflict between her and another girl, Xiu Mei, then forced Xiu Mei to beat her own friend. He joined in the beating himself, and in the end, Xiao Ha didn't survive the brutal assault. Right after that, he coldly dug a hole right there in the basement and buried her body like disposing of garbage. By May 2011, it was Xiao Kuang's turn to become the target. When Li Hao discovered she had developed a gynecological illness and could no longer serve him or appear in videos, he saw her as useless. Once again, he used the same tactic, manipulating the other girls into isolating Xiao Kuang. She was starved, forced to eat feces, drink urine, and live like a forgotten creature. The horror peaked in July 2011 when, after a brutal group beating involving both Li Hao and the psychologically manipulated girls, Xiao Kuang died. This time, Li Hao didn't simply bury the body. He placed her corpse in a concrete pit and sealed it shut, hoping no one would ever discover the truth. The sixth victim escapes. The crimes uncovered it seemed like the horrors would remain buried forever. Until one day, in September 2011, a glimmer of light finally pierced the darkness. Zhao Ting, 23 years old, the last girl to be abducted, finally broke the cycle and managed to escape. During one of the rare times she was taken outside by Li Hao to work, she risked everything and made a run for it. Straight to the police, where she revealed the full horrifying truth. Perhaps because she hadn't been held captive for too long, Zhao Tin hadn't been fully brainwashed like the others. Her testimony was taken seriously right away. The police acted without delay, raiding the hidden house, rescuing Xiao Mei, Dan Dan, and Kaka, and unearthing two bodies buried deep underground. Li Hao's monstrous crimes, which had gone on for nearly 2 years, were finally exposed to the world. Trial of a monster behind a mask of virtue on November 30th, 2012. Li Hao officially stood trial. He was charged with rape, murder, organizing prostitution, and unlawful imprisonment. The final verdict: death sentence. On January 21, 2014, after being approved by China's Supreme People's Court, Li Hao was executed in Luoyang City, bringing a grim end to the horrifying crimes he had committed. But this trial wasn't just about Li Hao alone. The 3 surviving girls rescued from the underground hell, Xiao Mei, Dan Dan, and Kaka, though victims themselves, were still brought to trial for their involvement in the deaths of the other 2 captives. They were charged with murder, as they had participated in the fatal beatings of Zhao He and Zhao Kuang under Li Hao's orders and coercion. However, due to the extraordinary circumstances under which the crimes were committed, psychological manipulation, extreme coercion, and the inhumane conditions they were forced to endure, all 3 were granted leniency. Xiao Mei was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Dan Dan and Kaka received suspended sentences and were placed under local supervision. They thought that once they escaped the underground prison, they could return to a normal life, but the truth was far more brutal. One of the 3 women couldn't recover from the psychological trauma. After returning to her family, she lost the ability to speak, feared light, and often sat in a daze unable to recognize where she was. That underground prison had forever buried a part of her soul. Those who were directly involved in the investigation have never been able to forget it. One police chief said, "I've been in this line of work for over 10 years, but I've never seen a case this cruel." But perhaps the one most shocked and devastated was none other than Li Hao's own wife. For all those years living together, she truly believed she had a decent husband, a quiet civil servant, always punctual, always dependable. But behind that facade was a monster in human form. When the truth came to light, it completely broke her. After the case, the director of the Luoyang City Police Department, had to publicly apologize for failing to detect the crime earlier and rescue the victims in time. Although the case ended with the highest sentence, whenever this incident is mentioned, the Chinese public still shudders because it was too cruel, too inhuman, and because no one ever expected to witness a horror story like this unfolding in real life. Today's video ends here. Thank you all for watching until the very end. See you in the next videos. Goodbye.